Welcome back, my friends. I'm Davis, and isn't it remarkable how these mysteries bring us together? Each night, across oceans and time zones, we meet again bound by curiosity and quiet tea. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read every single comment. Now, settle in. Let the lights dim. Let the rain whisper outside. Because tonight's mystery begins with a man who vanished before anyone noticed he'd arrived. Early spring. The kind that fools you into thinking winter has gone. St. Mary Mead still carried its chill. The hedges wet, the clouds uncertain, and the air sharp enough to sting the nose. Lady Dolly Bantry sat at her writing desk, humming softly. Letters. Invitations. A small list marked Spa Weekend. Her pen scratched across the paper in tidy loops. The hotel had promised rest, comfort, and mineral calm. Exactly what she needed after hosting 2 committees and 1 disaster of a bridge night. "Arthur," she called out, "I shall be away till Monday. You'll survive, I'm sure." From behind his newspaper came a quiet grunt of consent. Lady Bantry smiled. She enjoyed a husband who didn't argue with her plans. Across the lane, Miss Marple sat near her window. Knitting needles clicked softly. A pot of tea steamed beside her. The local newspaper lay folded open to the village column, her favorite part. "New guest at the Hartwell Spa," it read. "No name given. Booked under initials only." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Initials," she murmured. "Always suspicious. People hide behind them." She poured another cup of tea. Outside, sparrows fought over crumbs on the garden wall. The morning drifted peacefully. A delivery cart rattled past. A dog barked somewhere near the church. Ordinary sounds, the kind that made life predictable, and yet there was a tremor beneath the calm. At the post office, Mrs. Price Ridley was already spreading gossip. "They say he arrived late. Last night. Tall fellow. Car from London. No luggage to speak of." "Not a doctor?" someone asked. "Not a doctor," she said. "And not a gentleman either, if you ask me." The words spread faster than the morning breeze. By noon, everyone knew. A stranger had checked into the Hartwell Spa. Polite. Quiet. Too quiet, some said. He'd signed the register, taken room 14, and spoken hardly a word. The maid had noticed something odd. His key had never left the lock. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple listened to the church bells strike 12. She thought about her friend Dolly, always restless when there was nothing to organize. Perhaps a weekend away would do her good. Perhaps it would do them both good. She looked at the little note beside her chair. Dinner at the spa Saturday evening. Dolly's invitation, written in her looping hand. "Mineral baths and good company," Miss Marple said softly. She folded the note, placed it in her handbag, and rose to fetch her shawl. Old habits never left her. A weekend away might bring rest, or it might bring something else entirely. Outside, the road curved toward the hills. The spa sat beyond them, quiet and pale against the horizon. From this distance, it looked harmless, peaceful even, but Miss Marple's instincts never trusted appearances. She reached for her coat. The wind moved faintly through the garden gate. A sign creaked. A bird startled and flew, and somewhere in that hotel, a key waited to be used. Morning broke grey and thin. Steam rose from the lawns of the Hartwell Spa. The fountain outside gurgled softly, its sound mixing with the rustle of trays and teacups. Breakfast hour, polite voices, the soft clink of silverware. Lady Dolly Bantry liked the place at once. It had that faint scent of lavender polish and warm toast. She greeted the manager cheerfully, then took her seat near the window. Sunlight slid through glass, pale and hesitant. The other guests murmured about London weather, digestion, and mineral waters. Everything appeared ordinary, until the whispers began. A maid passed hurriedly across the corridor. Her eyes darted toward the staircase. Another followed, carrying a tray that trembled slightly in her hands. A silver lid slipped, clattered, and rolled. The sound froze the room. Dolly looked up. "Good heavens, child," she said gently. "Whatever's the matter?" the girl stammered. Nothing, ma'am. Only room 14 hasn't answered the bell. Her voice broke on the number. Dolly frowned. The new guest? The girl nodded. Yes, ma'am. The one who came last night. The dining room stirred. Someone laughed nervously. Another whispered, probably overslept. But the manager, a tidy man named Mr. Cleves, had already appeared at the doorway. His face was pale. He spoke quietly to a waiter who left at once. Something moved through the room, an unease, soft but definite. Dolly folded her napkin. Arthur always said curiosity will be the end of me, she muttered. Then she rose. In the hallway, 2 maids stood outside room 14. One clutched a breakfast tray, the other wrung her hands. Mr. Cleves tapped lightly at the door. Sir? Your breakfast, sir? No answer. He knocked again. The sound echoed through the silent corridor. Perhaps he went out early? Dolly suggested. No, ma'am, said the maid. His coat still on the stand. Dolly glanced at the keyhole. The key was still inside. From the inside. A small silence followed. Then Mr. Cleves turned the handle. Locked. He fetched the master key from his pocket, but it stopped halfway. The inside key blocked it. Strange, he muttered. He must have turned it after closing the door. The maids looked frightened. Dolly's curiosity sharpened. Is there another way in? Only through the window, ma'am. Faces the courtyard. A waiter was? Sent around at once. He returned moments later, breathless. The window's locked, sir. Curtains drawn. Mr. Cleves hesitated. Break it, Dolly said quietly. He stared. Madam, break it, she repeated. We can't stand here guessing. The man fetched a poker from the hearth. A quick strike. Glass cracked, fell inward in neat splinters. Cold air rushed through the hall. Mr. Cleves climbed through first, careful, cautious. Dolly waited, heart thudding though she would never admit it. Inside, they heard his voice. Low, uneven, then silence. A chair scraped. A drawer opened, and at last the latch turned from within. The door creaked open. Dolly stepped forward, breath held. The air smelled faintly of soap and iron. The bed untouched. The window locked. The suitcase half-packed. But no sign of the man. No coat missing. No footprints on the carpet. Nothing. Just an empty room. And when the door finally opened, the room was empty. The room felt wrong. Too neat. Too quiet. Lady Dolly Bantry stepped inside first. Her eyes moved from the bed to the desk, then to the single window. Everything seemed arranged, yet not lived in, like a stage after the play had ended. Mr. Cleves followed, his hands trembling slightly. He looked embarrassed, as if a guest's disappearance reflected poorly on his carpets. Strange business, madam, he murmured. The fire's gone cold, but the kettle's warm. Dolly touched the teapot, still faintly hot. Someone had poured tea not long ago. On the desk lay a glove, left hand only, soft brown leather, damp at the edges, as though recently worn. Beside it, a fountain pen, uncapped, a sheet of paper, half written, half torn. She leaned closer. The ink still glistened. It read, "You may think you are safe, but..." Then nothing. The line ended mid-word. The tear was clean, deliberate. Mr. Cleves examined the room's corners. The suitcase lay open on the stand, half-packed, shirts folded precisely, no shoes missing, toothbrush still dry, razor untouched. Who leaves in such a way? Dolly moved toward the wardrobe. She opened it slowly. A faint smell of damp wool escaped. Inside a heavy overcoat, grey, lined with silk. Pockets empty. A small paper tag sewn inside. H. Lenton, Savile Row. She didn't recognize the name. She doubted anyone would. Then her eyes caught something on the floor. A wet mark. Circular, like a drip from an umbrella. She looked under the table. There it was, leaning against the chair leg. Dark handle, silver tip. Its fabric still wet from rain. But it hasn't rained since last night, Dolly said softly. The manager swallowed. Perhaps condensation. Perhaps not, she replied. The maid, Nora, lingered in the doorway. Her hands twisted the corner of her apron. "Ma'am," she whispered, "I brought his breakfast at 7. I knocked twice. No answer. But what? I heard something inside, like a drawer closing, then footsteps, then nothing." Dolly exchanged a look with the manager. "Footsteps?" "Yes, ma'am, but only inside. No one came out." They all looked down at the carpet. Thick, patterned, dustless. No footprints, not a mark near the door. "Mr. Cleves turned to the register on the hall stand. "We should verify his name," he said quickly, seeking order in routine. He fetched the guest book, open to the last page. The signature sat clearly at the bottom. R. Harding, it read. A London address beneath Bloomsbury Square. Dolly frowned. Seems respectable enough. He turned another page, then froze. The paper edges were uneven. Someone had torn a sheet clean out. Dolly bent over the book. A faint impression remained on the next page, half a name pressed into the paper below. Unreadable, but deliberate. She straightened slowly. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "No one leaves without reason," she said. Her eyes went back to the single glove on the desk, the missing right hand, the half-sentence, the torn sheet. Outside the corridor stayed silent, no creaks, no voices, no sound of retreating steps. And yet, someone had torn a page from the guest book. The telephone rang just after 9, sharp and urgent. Miss Marple looked up from her teacup. The cat stirred on the hearth rug. No one called this early unless something was wrong. She lifted the receiver. "Street, Merrymead 317. A familiar voice answered, trembling, breathless. "Jane, it's Dolly." "Oh, my dear, something dreadful has happened." Miss Marple's tone stayed calm. "Take your time, Dolly. What sort of dreadful?" "There's a vanished man and a frightened maid," came the reply. Then silence. A long, uncertain breath. Miss Marple leaned back in her chair. Her needles lay in her lap, still crossed in mid-row. She could hear the faint clatter of cups on the other end. Nervous hands. A shaken hostess. "Tell me everything," she said softly. And Dolly began. She spoke of the spa hotel, the new guest who arrived without luggage, the locked room, the missing man, the glove on the desk, and the torn page from the register. Each word trembled through the line, clear and uneven. Miss Marple listened without interruption. Now and then, a faint sound of knitting resumed. Click, pause, click. It helped her think. She pictured the hotel, the staff, the breakfast room. People always gave themselves away in breakfast rooms. When Dolly stopped talking, the line hummed quietly. "Are you sure he's gone?" Miss Marple asked. "Quite sure," Dolly said. "The managers searched everywhere. The man's vanished." "Vanished?" "Yes. And the maid swears she heard footsteps inside the locked room." "I see," said Miss Marple. Another pause. She could hear the mantel clock ticking. 12 minutes past 9. The cat stretched, yawned, and settled again. "Dolly, listen carefully," she said at last. "You must not let them move anything. Not a glove, not a letter, not a crumb of ash." "Of course, Jane. But what do you think it means?" "It means," Miss Marple replied quietly, "that someone wishes to appear gone, and those who wish to appear gone are never far." Dolly shivered on the other end. "Will you come?" "I will," said Miss Marple. "The 10:50 train to Little Hartwell. I can catch it if I hurry." "Oh, Jane, do be careful. The whole place feels wrong." "I rather hope so," Miss Marple murmured. "Wrong places are usually where one finds answers." She replaced the receiver gently, then rose, deliberate as always, her shawl from the peg, her hat pinned neatly, her knitting packed into a small blue bag. She left a note for her housekeeper. Gone to visit Mrs. Bantry. Feed the cat. Her coat smelled faintly of lavender. The morning air bit her cheeks as she stepped outside. At the station, smoke hung low over the platform. A few travellers waited, collars turned up against the chill. Miss Marple bought a ticket to Little Hartwell. No fuss, no hurry. The porter tipped his cap. "Terrible business at the hotel, ma'am," he said. She nodded. "So I hear." The whistle blew once, sharp and final. Miss Marple settled by the window, her bag at her side. The train shuddered, then began to move. Her needles clicked softly. Her eyes watched the passing hedgerows. Each mile brought her closer to answers, and by the time the 2 o'clock train left, she was on it, needles clicking, eyes sharp. The train sighed to a stop at Little Hartwell. Steam drifted through the air like ghostly lace. Miss Marple stepped down carefully, her bag tucked beneath her arm. Cold wind. Damp platform. The faint smell of coal. A porter touched his cap. "Going to the spa, ma'am?" She smiled. "Yes, the Hartwell." "Strange goings on there," he muttered. "Best you mind your step." She thanked him, as if he'd told her the time. The road curved up through pale trees. Mist lay low on the hedgerows. By the time the carriage reached the hilltop, the spa appeared grand, quiet, and uneasy. Stone arches, polished windows, and a silence that felt practiced. Lady Dolly Bantry met her at the entrance. "Jane," she cried, half in relief. "You made good time." Miss Marple kissed her cheek lightly. "I was not about to miss such an interesting breakfast," she said. They entered the hall. The air smelled faintly of polish and eucalyptus. A fire burned low in the grate, as if watched too closely. Staff moved quietly, glancing toward the stairwell and then away again. Dolly lowered her voice. "The police haven't come yet. The manager thought best to keep it private." "Of course he did," said Miss Marple. "Hotels dislike headlines." She hung her coat and followed Dolly into the lounge. 4 people sat there, 4 faces, carefully calm. Mr. Avery, the journalist's nervous hands, ink stains on his cuffs. He pretended to read a paper, but didn't turn a page. Mrs. Henton, the widow silk dress, diamonds, and the weary poise of someone used to sympathy. Dr. Crane, quiet and thin, with the watchful patience of a man who observes more than he speaks. And Nora, the maid, eyes red, apron creased, guilt clinging to her like perfume. Dolly whispered their names, one by one. Miss Marple nodded, taking them in. Eyes first. Always the eyes. Who watched whom? Who looked down too soon? Who smiled without reason? Mrs. Henton rose politely. "Mrs. Bantry, how dreadful for you. Such a scene in your hotel." "It isn't mine," Dolly said quickly. "And dreadful indeed." She turned. "Mrs. Henton, may I present Miss Marple? She's visiting from Street. Mary Mead." Mrs. Henton smiled, but the corners of her mouth trembled. "Such awful weather for travelling, Miss Marple." "Yes," said Miss Marple, "but mysteries travel faster than trains." Dr. Crane offered a nod, eyes lowered. Mr. Avery mumbled something about deadlines and returned to his unread paper. Nora dropped a spoon. The sound rang too loudly in the quiet room. Miss Marple Saturday. Her knitting emerged. The soft click of needles joined the ticking of the clock. Conversation fluttered, then faded. She asked small questions. Nothing direct. Had anyone seen the missing guest that morning? Had he spoken much the night before? Answers came quickly, too quickly. Each voice tidy, rehearsed. But truth rarely practiced so well. A gust moved the curtains. The chandelier trembled faintly. No one spoke for a full minute. Then Miss Marple smiled, her eyes moving from face to face. Each person wore the same expression: concern, politeness, confusion. Except one. Only one looked relieved that the man was gone. The investigation began quietly. Miss Marple preferred it that way. No fuss, no sudden movements. Just observation, patience, and tea. After luncheon, the guests drifted to their rooms. Dolly and Mr. Cleves accompanied Miss Marple back to room 14. The door was open now. The air inside was cold and faintly scented with smoke. Miss Marple paused by the threshold. "Has anyone touched the fireplace?" The manager straightened nervously. "We removed some ashes, ma'am, but only to clear the grate." she murmured. And did you notice what you were burning? He blinked. Just paper, I suppose. She knelt beside the hearth. A small mound of grey ash lay beneath the grate, scattered unevenly. She lifted a bit with her knitting needle. Something white showed through the soot, not burned completely. She used the edge of a newspaper to pull it free. It was a scrap of letter paper, crisp around the edges, the center darkened by heat. Most of the words were gone, except one line near the bottom. You will have what you asked for, but it will cost. The rest was lost to flame. At the corner of the page, a small stain glimmered faintly. Red wax. Soft still. A partial seal. Only the curved edge of a letter. Perhaps an R. Miss Marple held it to the light. A letter sealed and burned, she said softly. Never a good sign. Dolly shivered. Who signs a note and throws it into fire the same night? Someone who regrets writing it, Miss Marple said. She folded the scrap neatly and slipped it into her knitting bag. The manager looked uncomfortable. Perhaps he burned it to warm the room. Paper burns too quickly to warm anything, she said. Her tone remained kind, but her eyes sharpened. She examined the grate again. Mixed among the ashes lay a trace of something shiny. She pinched it out carefully. Sealing wax, melted flat against the metal. Its color, deep crimson, old-fashioned, expensive. Miss Marple rose slowly, brushing her skirt. Would you show me your office, Mr. Cleves? He hesitated, then nodded. Of course, madam. This way. They walked down the hall to the manager's office. The shelves lined with ledgers, ink bottles, keys hung neatly on brass hooks, and near the blotter, a tin of sealing wax. She opened it gently. Inside lay sticks of pale blue wax, not red, unused, untouched. She tapped the tin lightly. Do you often keep more than one color? No, ma'am. That's the only kind we've ever used for receipts and letters. Dolly crossed her arms. Then someone else brought the red wax, she said. Someone with a letter worth burning. Miss Marple gave a faint smile. Her fingers pressed the folded scrap inside her bag. She'd seen letters like that before. Quiet words that carried loud secrets. The fire crackled faintly behind them, though no flame burned. Somewhere down the corridor, a clock struck 4. Long, hollow, notes. Miss Marple looked toward the sound. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The color of the wax was red, but the wax tin in the office was blue. Evening settled over the spa. Soft light, muted steps, a calm too deliberate to be natural. Miss Marple always knew where truth hid best below stairs, among maids and housekeepers, where gossip moved quicker than telegrams. She asked Mr. Cleves for a moment alone with Nora. The maid came hesitantly, eyes lowered, hands clasped tight in her apron. Sit, my dear, Miss Marple said kindly. Nora perched on the edge of a wooden chair, trembling. You're not in trouble, Miss Marple began. I only want to know what you saw. Nora hesitated. Her lips moved, then stopped. Finally, she whispered, It was late, ma'am, after midnight. The service corridor was narrow and dim. A single lamp burned at the far end, its glass smudged by dust. The air smelled of soap and damp linen. Miss Marple waited, calm as a shadow. Nora continued, I was bringing towels up from the laundry. I shouldn't have been in the upper hall so late, but Mrs. Henton asked for hot water. She swallowed hard. When I passed the landing, I saw him. The missing guest? Yes, ma'am. Mr. Harding. He was standing near the door to the reading room. What was he doing? Talking to Mrs. Henton. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Mrs. Henton? At that hour? Nora nodded. She was in her dressing gown, looked upset. He was holding something small like a parcel. A parcel? Yes, ma'am. A bit of cloth tied with string. He pressed it into her hands. She didn't want to take it. I could see that. But he kept insisting. What happened then? They argued, quietly but angry-like. Then she took it and walked off toward her room. Miss Marple's needles clicked once in her lap. She didn't look up. And Mr. Harding? He stood there, a long while. Then he went toward the stairs. I thought he was leaving, but what? Nora's voice trembled. I heard a crash a few minutes later. A tray or something falling. Then silence. No footsteps. Nothing. Miss Marple watched her carefully. Nora's eyes glistened with fear, not guilt. She was telling the truth. At least the part she knew. Did anyone else hear? I don't think so. Mrs. Henton's room is on the far side. Dr. Crane sleeps light, but he said nothing this morning. And Mr. Avery left early. Miss Marple nodded. The parcel, Nora. Did you see it again? No, ma'am. Describe the cloth. It was white, or maybe cream. Looked like handkerchief linen, fine and soft. There was something inside it, but not large. Miss Marple's voice softened. And this morning? Nora's fingers twisted her apron again. I went to Mrs. Henton's room with her breakfast. The cloth was gone. The dresser was clear, like it had never been there. A silence hung between them, only the sound of water pipes ticking in the wall. Then Miss Marple smiled faintly, almost kindly. You've done very well, my dear. Sometimes it's the smallest things people try hardest to hide. She rose, thanked the girl, and moved toward the corridor. Her steps slow, her thoughts fast. A secret parcel, an argument, a crash in the dark, then nothing. She reached the end of the hall and paused. The lamp flickered once, then steadied, and in the morning, the cloth was gone. Morning mist lingered outside the spa windows. The air smelled faintly of salt and polish. Miss Marple sat near the lounge fire, knitting in silence. The guests pretended to read, pretended not to stare. Mr. Avery fidgeted in his chair. His newspaper was upside down. Ink stains marked his cuffs again. He'd been watching her since breakfast, waiting for her to look away. She didn't. At last he stood. Miss Marple, he said quietly. May I speak to you privately? She folded her knitting and nodded. They walked to the small reading room near the conservatory. The door shut softly behind them. He didn't sit. He began pacing, his shoes tapping lightly against the tiles. I suppose you've guessed I knew him, he said. Mr. Harding? Yes. His tone was flat, but his hands trembled. How long have you known him? Years, Avery said. We worked together. Newspapers. London. Miss Marple tilted her head. And now? We weren't friends anymore. He rubbed his forehead. Not since the trial. She waited. He looked up sharply. You do know who he was, don't you? I prefer to hear it from you. A faint smile crossed his lips. He wasn't Harding. His name was Roland Hill, once a reporter. Later, something less honest. Miss Marple didn't move. And you? I left journalism before it ruined me, he said bitterly. But Hill he didn't. He sold stories, blackmail, secrets for cash. It caught up with him. He stopped pacing. 3 years ago, a woman took the stand against a member of Parliament. Letters were printed, scandal everywhere. Hill leaked them. The paper fired him. He vanished. Miss Marple watched him quietly. And now he reappears at this spa, she said. Under another name. He nodded. Yes, he found me. Wrote last week. Said he had something important to share. Wanted to meet here. Said it could clear both our names. Clear? Avery's jaw tightened. He meant blackmail again. I knew it. He turned away, staring through the fogged glass. I shouldn't have come, but he said if I didn't, he'd send what he had to my editor. And you met him? In the lounge before midnight. He looked worse than I remembered. Nervous. Half drunk. He said he'd been following someone. A woman. Mrs. Henton, maybe. I don't know. Miss. Marple spoke softly. You didn't see him again? No. I went to bed. I wanted no part of it. And now he's gone. His shoulders sagged. I swear I didn't touch him, Miss Marple. I was frightened. That's all. She nodded slowly. Fear always left a particular scent. Not of innocence. Not of guilt. Just delay. Avery rubbed his hands together. You don't believe me. I believe, said Miss Marple, that fear can make a man do many things, even tidy things he shouldn't. He looked at her sharply. What do you mean? Only that some people fear discovery more than danger, she said. Then she rose, collected her knitting, and left him by the window. In the corridor, Dolly waited. "Well?" she whispered. "He knew our missing man," Miss Marple said, "and he lied about when he last saw him." Lied. "Fear," said Miss Marple quietly. "It makes fine company for deceit." She moved on, thoughtful, eyes distant, her steps soft, her mind quick. A man who vanished. Another who trembled too soon. Fear, she thought, is a fine mask for preparation. The afternoon light dimmed early. Rain tapped against the tall windows of the Hartwell Spa. Guests murmured over tea. Pages of newspapers turned, more for comfort than reading. Miss Marple sat quietly near the hearth, her knitting paused mid-stitch. Something in the lounge disturbed her peace, though no one else seemed to notice. A feeling, a detail, something not quite right. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, the same chairs, the same tables, the same portraits of solemn faces staring down from the walls, yet one frame drew her attention. It hung above the piano, slightly crooked. Not enough for anyone else to care, but enough for her to see. The dust line around it didn't match. Someone had moved it recently. She waited until the lounge emptied. Dolly followed her gaze. "Jane, what are you staring at now?" "That? Portrait, my dear," Miss Marple said. "It offends the laws of balance." Dolly blinked. "Balance?" "Yes. Pictures never tilt by themselves unless the hand that touched them was impatient." She rose, small and steady, and crossed to the piano. The portrait showed a serious man, Sir Alaric Hartwell, founder of the Spa, grey hair, gold frame, eyes that had once frightened chambermaids, or so the stories went. Miss Marple touched the lower corner of the frame. It shifted easily. Too easily. She lifted it slightly. A faint scraping sound answered. Behind it, the wallpaper bore a square outline. Inside that outline, a shallow recess cut into the wall, barely large enough for a book, or a folded something. Dolly gasped. "Good heavens, Jane!" "Hush," Miss Marple murmured. "Curiosity mustn't shout." She reached in carefully. Her fingers brushed fabric. Soft, thin. She drew it out a piece of white cloth, folded small. It wasn't dusty. It wasn't forgotten. Someone had placed it there within the last day or two. Dolly leaned closer. "What is it?" Miss Marple unfolded the square gently. Embroidery caught the light, small, neat initials stitched in blue. "R.H.," she read aloud. Dolly frowned. "Roland Hill? Perhaps. Or perhaps someone else with the same letters." Miss Marple turned the cloth over. One corner bore a faint stain, pinkish, like the edge of perfume. She raised it to her nose. Not old linen. Not dust. A trace of scent floral. Expensive. Unmistakably feminine. Dolly whispered, "Could it be Mrs. Henton's?" Miss Marple gave a small smile. "Her initials are M.H., not R. Unless, of course, she had reason to change them." They both stared at the recess in the wall. The edges were clean, no cobwebs, no settled dust. Opened and closed too recently for chance. Miss Marple folded the cloth again, neatly, with the same care she gave her knitting. She slipped it into her handbag beside the burned letter scrap. 2 clues now, both linked by secrecy and haste. The fire crackled faintly behind them. Somewhere upstairs, a door shut quietly. Too quietly. Miss Marple looked up, her eyes narrow with thought. She had known from the beginning that this mystery carried a scent. Now she was certain. Because the stitching smelled faintly of perfume, not dust. Afternoon tea. The quiet heart of any English investigation. No police, no threats. Just teacups, sugar bowls, and lies politely poured. Miss Marple asked that everyone gather in the lounge. It was, she said, a matter of decency to talk things through. No one refused. Guilt never does, not when it wants to appear calm. Dolly arranged the tea tray. 2 teapots. 1 sugared, 1 plain. Lemon slices on a small porcelain plate. The scene looked harmless, domestic, the perfect setting for revelation. Mrs. Henton sat nearest the fire. Jewels glinted at her throat. Dr. Crane leaned against the piano, arms crossed. Mr. Avery hovered by the window, his nerves thin as paper. Nora stood near the door, pretending to dust. Miss Marple poured tea with her usual care. She served Mrs. Henton first. Sugar? No, thank you. Lemon? A pause. Mrs. Henton shook her head. Never lemon. It spoils the aroma. Miss Marple nodded. She turned to Dr. Crane. He accepted both sugar and lemon. Mr. Avery declined sugar, but took lemon. Nora refused everything, her hands still shaking. Small talk followed. Trivial things. Weather, trains, the unreliability of post. Miss Marple steered it gently toward the subject she wanted. Such a beautiful hotel, she said, sipping her tea. Though I imagine it must be a trial when guests misplace valuables. A silence fell. Subtle. Waited. Dolly blinked. Mrs. Henton smiled too quickly. Oh, I've misplaced plenty. Earrings, handkerchiefs, sense of humor. The room laughed politely, without warmth. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on her. Indeed. One hears a curious thing about lost jewelry. It's rarely the losing that troubles people, it's who might have found it. Mrs. Henton's hand moved instinctively to her neck, then stopped midway. She realized what she'd done and lowered it again. Dr. Crane coughed softly. Mr. Avery turned his head toward the rain. Nora froze where she stood. No one spoke. Miss Marple stirred her tea, slow and even. I imagine a lady of your refinement would never wear imitation gems, Mrs. Henton. The widow's lips tightened. Of course not. Of course, Miss Marple echoed. Her tone was gentle. Her eyes were not. She reached for the lemon, cut a slice, dropped it in her own cup. The faint hiss of citrus filled the silence. Interesting, isn't it, she said, how scent lingers. One can wash linen, burn paper, even lock doors, but perfume never hides. Mrs. Henton's hand trembled slightly. Her spoon clinked against the cup. Mr. Avery looked from one woman to the other, pale and uncertain. Dr. Crane watched without blinking. Nora took a step back, whispering a prayer no one heard. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Some truths, she said, float to the surface like lemon in tea. She looked at the cup in Mrs. Henton's hand, untouched, steam curling upward, no lemon slice. Outside, thunder murmured over the hills. Inside, no one moved. The clock ticked once, twice, then stopped, as if listening. Mrs. Henton lifted her cup, but her fingers slipped slightly on the handle. Her rings caught the light, the same rings that weren't on her last night's list of missing things. Miss Marple folded her napkin, calm as ever. Her voice soft, measured. I do so admire a woman who knows her own taste, she said, and how carefully she keeps it. No one laughed. No one spoke. Mrs. Henton stared into her tea, her face unreadable. The scent of her, perfume faint and floral, drifted through the air. Miss Marple's eyes rested on her for one long moment. And then she said quietly, only she refused the lemon. Evening crept over the Hartwell spa. The hallways glowed with low amber light. Guests had retreated to their rooms. Doors shut softly, like secrets closing for the night. Miss Marple walked alone, her steps slow, soundless on the thick carpet. Her knitting bag hung from one arm. Inside it, truth, folded in small, quiet pieces. She passed the lounge first. The air still carried traces of perfume. Mrs. Henton's cup had remained untouched, the lemon plate untouched too. Some people hide guilt in gestures too neat. Miss Marple turned down the west corridor. Room numbers gleamed in brass. Each door a story, each lock a silence. She stopped outside room 14, the vanished man's room. Her eyes studied the carpet. No footprints. Yet she noticed something faint, the pile pressed in one direction near the skirting. A small sign of something dragged, not walked. She crouched, touched the fibers lightly. Yes, the weight had shifted sideways. Someone had moved something heavy from this room to the next. She straightened. Room 15, Mrs. Henton's door. She stood before it, listening, Silence. Too perfect. She turned, walked back the way she came, and began to speak softly to herself, her favorite method of thinking. 10:55. The man speaks with Mrs. Henton. A parcel passes between them. After midnight, Nora hears voices, then a crash. By morning, the man is gone, the cloth missing, the register page torn. Her steps slowed, her thoughts sharpened. He didn't vanish. He moved. Her whisper echoed faintly in the hall. Someone helped him, or rather, someone moved him. She paused at the landing, looking down toward the main stair. The space between the two rooms, 14 and 15, was small, adjoining almost. If it were to open the connecting door between them. If it existed, he could be transferred easily, quickly, silently. She turned back. The wall between them showed a faint line of paint unevenly spread, as if someone had covered a mark in haste. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Hotels," she murmured. "Always have more doors than they admit." She continued her walk, step by step, clue by clue. Her mind ran backward through the day, Mrs. Henton's trembling hands, the perfume, the initials on the cloth, the red wax, the missing letter. Everything connected, each piece fit, except one. Why had he come back? Why now, after years gone? If he meant to blackmail her, he would not have burned his letter. If she meant to kill him, she would not have hidden the evidence so carelessly. Unless. Both plans collided. She reached the end of the corridor, where the window overlooked the garden. Rain streaked the glass. The lights from the fountain shimmered below. It looked peaceful. But peace, she knew, was often the final disguise of panic. She turned back once more. The corridor stretched long and narrow, like a memory refusing to end. Somewhere inside those walls lay the truth. The room wasn't empty. The man hadn't vanished. He'd been moved swiftly, deliberately by someone with access, motive, and nerve. Miss Marple tightened her shawl. The cold reached her fingers now. Her eyes drifted toward room 15 once again. Her expression softened, thoughtful, certain. The puzzle was nearly whole, but puzzles without purpose were never satisfying. Something still didn't fit. Her footsteps slowed near the turn of the corridor. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "One piece still missing," she said. Then her eyes lifted, the faintest gleam of realization breaking through. The reason. The rain had stopped by evening. The air smelled faintly of stone and smoke. Dinner was served late, though no one felt hungry. Every chair in the dining hall was taken. Even the empty one, the one for the vanished man, waited, untouched. Miss Marple sat at the head of the table. Her knitting lay folded beside her plate. Dolly Bantry, pale but steady, sat to her right. Mr. Cleves, the manager, lingered by the wall, hands clasped tight. Across the table, Mrs. Henton, graceful, composed, her smile measured. Dr. Crane beside her. Mr. Avery at the far end, restless, his fork tracing lines across the linen. And Nora, standing quietly near the door, eyes wide, heart louder than her breath. The room hummed with unease, cutlery stilled. Conversation died. Only the clock over the mantel spoke, marking each second like a warning. Miss Marple lifted her teacup. "Before we dine," she began softly, "we should put our minds in order." Her voice was calm, almost kind, the way a schoolteacher might speak before a lesson everyone feared. "No police yet," she continued, "but truth seldom waits for uniforms." She folded her hands on the table. "Let us begin with what we know." Her gaze moved from face to face. The guest arrived under a false name, R. Harding. The register says so, yet his true name was Roland Hill, a reporter with a past. Mr. Avery looked down. Miss Marple went on. "He met Mrs. Henton late that night. Witnessed by Nora. He gave her something cloth, wrapped, small, important. Then came a sound, a crash. Silence followed. Mrs. Henton's smile thinned. "I hardly think this speculation appropriate." "It's not speculation," Miss Marple said quietly. "It's sequence, the order in which deceit prefers to hide." She picked up her knitting needles, tapping them once against the table. Later, the man was gone. His room, empty. But he hadn't left the building. There were no footprints in the hall, no coat missing, no luggage taken. And yet, the key remained in the lock, turned from inside. Dolly shifted slightly. "Impossible," she whispered. "Not impossible," said Miss Marple. "Merely inconvenient." She rose slowly, her movements gentle, her voice steady. "The truth of this mystery isn't in how he vanished, but where he went. The clue lay not in the ashes or the glove, but in the wall between two rooms." A ripple passed through the table. "Between room 14, she said, "and room 15. A door, sealed once, painted over, recently unsealed again." Nora gasped softly. Dr. Crane looked at Mrs. Henton. Mr. Avery's hand froze over his plate. Miss Marple continued. "The carpet showed drag marks. The wall, a fresh coat of paint. Someone moved the man. Someone with strength, motive, and access." She paused. No sound in the room. Even the clock seemed to hesitate. "Mr. Avery feared exposure," she said. "Dr. Crane feared scandal. But fear leaves marks. It shakes hands. It stammers." Her gaze turned toward the widow. "Yours never trembled, Mrs. Henton." Mrs. Henton met her eyes, calm and unblinking. "You accuse me, Miss Marple." "I do not accuse," said Miss Marple softly. "I conclude." Dolly held her breath. Miss Marple stepped closer to the head of the table. "Because the man everyone sought," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "never left her side." Silence held the room. Not a breath, not a movement, only the faint hiss of the fire, steady and low. Mrs. Henton sat very still. Her hand rested lightly on the tablecloth. A perfect hand, calm, pale, dangerous. Miss Marple waited. She never pressed confessions. Truth, when cornered, always walked out on its own. Mrs. Henton's gaze drifted toward the window. Rain began again, thin and soft against the glass. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, almost tender. "You're right, Miss Marple. He never left my side." Dolly gasped. The manager gripped the back of a chair. Nora stepped backward, hand over her mouth. Mrs. Henton didn't look at them. Her eyes stayed fixed on the fire. "He was my husband," she said. "Rowland Hill. Not Harding. Not any of the names he used later. My husband." Her words fell like dust light, then heavy. "We were married when I was very young. He was charming, then cruel. He took money from my friends, from my family, from me. And when there was nothing left to take, he disappeared. Everyone believed he'd drowned off Dover. I let them." Miss Marple didn't move. She only nodded once, faintly. Mrs. Henton continued. "He came back 3 nights ago. Older, thinner, but the same man. He found me here, said he'd changed, but his voice still carried that old poison, soft, sweet, deadly." She reached for her teacup, then stopped. "He asked for money. Said he had letters. Letters from years ago. He would send them to the papers if I didn't pay." Her mouth trembled once, then steadied. "I told him I would bring the money. Instead, I brought tea." No one spoke. Even the fire seemed to listen. She looked at Miss Marple now, not pleading, not proud, just honest. "I'd brought morphine. From my husband's illness. Enough to quiet a storm." She drew a slow breath. "He drank it without a word. He never questioned me. He trusted the same hands that once wore his ring." A pause. The clock struck softly. 1 stroke. 2. Her voice broke for the first time. "When it was done, I sat there, the cup still warm. He looked peaceful. The first time in 20 years. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her tone stayed clear. "And then, I waited until the hall was empty. I used the old door between our rooms. He wasn't heavy. He'd been light for years. I moved him through the passage into room 14, locked the door from inside, turned the key, and closed it from my side." Mr. Avery made a sound half shock, half pity. Dr. Crane lowered his eyes. Dolly whispered, "My dear heavens." Mrs. Henton folded her hands. "There were no police I could call, no forgiveness anyone would give, so I gave him mercy instead." She leaned back in her chair. eyes on the fire again. Her diamonds caught the light and burned red. "He came for money," she said quietly, her voice hardly more than breath. He had come for money. She gave him mercy. Morning light crept through the thin curtains, soft, grey and reluctant. The rain had stopped some time before dawn. Now the world looked washed, quiet, uncertain, and cold. A police motor car waited outside the Hartwell Spa, its engine ticking faintly in the damp air. Inside, the guests spoke in whispers. Suitcases closed, trays clattered. The calm of routine, rebuilt after storm. Miss Marple sat by the window, knitting once more. Her needles moved slow, measured, each stitch a thought, each loop a memory. Dolly Bantry joined her with 2 cups of tea. She handed one across carefully. No sugar, no lemon. Marple smiled faintly. "You remembered." Dolly nodded. She looked tired, but softer somehow. The kind of tired that comes from too much truth, not too little sleep. "They've taken her," Dolly said quietly. "The police, I mean." She didn't struggle, just stood and thanked them. Miss Marple didn't answer at first. Her eyes followed the movement outside, the constable lifting his hat, the inspector checking his watch, the car door closing with a muted click. Then she said softly, "She was never cruel, you know, only desperate." Dolly sighed. "She poisoned him, Jane." "Yes, but desperation is its own poison, one that brews slowly." They sat in silence for a while. The fire burned low. The hotel clock ticked. Someone in the corridor laughed too loudly, as people do when trying to forget. Dolly spoke again, hesitant. "You knew it was her long before tonight, didn't you?" Miss Marple's smile deepened, just a little. "The perfume, Dolly. Always the perfume. It lingers where truth hides." She set her knitting aside and folded her hands. "Mrs. Henton loved once. Poorly, perhaps, but deeply. And love like that leaves stains even time can't wash away." Dolly leaned back, watching the grey sky beyond the glass. "You pity her?" "I understand her," Miss Marple said. "She spent her life repairing the ruins he left behind. Then one night he returned and she chose to end the ruins instead." Neither spoke again for a moment. Outside, the police car pulled away slowly. The gravel crunched. The sound faded. Peace returned, but not the same peace as before. Dolly touched Marple's arm. "Will they hang her?" Miss Marple shook her head. "I don't think so. Not for pity's sake. Not when a woman ends the pain that was already killing her." The clock chimed 9. The day had begun. Guests returned to their tea and papers. The hotel resumed its rhythm, pretending nothing had happened. Miss Marple stood, gathering her shawl. "We should go home," she said. "Evil wears many costumes, but this one wore loneliness best." Dolly followed her gaze to the departing car, a blur of grey against the road. "She'll never be forgiven," Dolly whispered. "No," said Miss Marple quietly. "Not soon. Not here." They walked toward the door. Sunlight broke faintly through the clouds, pale and weak but persistent. It touched the window panes, then faded. Miss Marple paused at the threshold, her voice barely more than a breath. "In street?" "Mary Mead," she said. "Forgiveness is slower than justice." Davis's voice returns, warm, calm, familiar. "So, my friends, could you have guessed before Miss Marple did?" He pauses. A quiet breath between questions. Which clue betrayed Mrs. Henton? The cloth, the tea, or the fear? The fire crackles faintly in the background. A kettle hums, just out of sight. Edward smiles through his words. "Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. Some of you always spot the truth before the reveal." A moment of silence. Then softly, "Thank you for listening, for sharing your evening with us, wherever you are." The tone gentles like closing a book. "But don't go far. There's always another story waiting in St. Mary Mead." The kettle whistles once, sharp and inviting. Edward lowers his voice. "Tomorrow," he says, "another kettle will boil." Night again, quiet streets. The lamps burn low in St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple sits by her window, the cat asleep beside her. A soft knock breaks the stillness. The post. One envelope only. Cream paper. Red wax. She turns it over. The seal unmistakable. Same handwriting as before. Neat. Elegant. But the initials, different. Her fingers rest on the edge. She doesn't open it yet. The kettle hums faintly in the background. She smiles. Just once. Old habits. Old puzzles. The next mystery, she whispers, it seems, has already begun.